The Elastic Constitution. The broadcast begins in 10 seconds. WDBC Internet Television is on. I'm Michael P. Borgia. The broadcast, originating from deep behind enemy lines, is brought to you by dailyborg.com. Conservative politics for the thoughtful. Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. Well, the dust is settled and the snow is laid back on the ground at the conclusion of the Iowa caucuses. But meanwhile, back in Washington, the president has returned from vacation, and he's creating mischief by stretching the Constitution into shapes the framers would not dare recognize. We'll tell you what it's all about when the broadcast continues in a moment.
Hands can do incredible things. Now they can even help save a life with hands-only CPR. If you see an adult suddenly collapse, just call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Learn more at handsonlycpr.org.
What if I didn't come from a famous family? What if I didn't have all their support? What if I didn't have all these opportunities? Believe me, it wouldn't be pretty. Pause before you play.
The president in Ohio today announced that he is granting a recess appointment to Richard Cordray to be the head of the new Consumer Protection Bureau, established as part of the Dodd-Frank law passed in 2010. Republicans vociferously objected to the appointment and mounted a filibuster against it this year, so that it could not muster the necessary 60 votes needed to move ahead in the United States Senate. Now, recess appointments are nothing new. Presidents have used them with greater and greater frequency as the years have gone by. In his first 3 years in office, President Bush made 31 recess appointments, most of them judges. President Obama so far has made 21. The difference being that for the first 2/3 of those 2 years, President Obama enjoyed a supermajority in the United States Senate and was pretty much able to do anything he wanted. So the 21 recess appointments made by President Obama is an extremely high number, considering the fact that the Senate has been under the control of his party this entire time. But what's so particularly controversial about this one is the manner in which Obama has done it. When President Bush made recess appointments, the Senate was really in recess for long periods of time, and the Senate does go on break for weeks at a time and only legislates approximately 150 to 170 days out of the year. However, in order for both houses to adjourn, each must have the consent of the other. Knowing that Obama might move to recess appoint Cordray to head the Consumer Protection Board, the House of Representatives refused to give the Senate permission to adjourn. So the Senate was required to remain in pro forma session. Now the way this is done is by simply having senators who live within driving distance of the Capitol, usually the senators from Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, drive down every third day, gavel the Senate into session, and then drive home. No actual business is conducted, and 3 days later, they repeat the process again. 3 days being the typically required period of time for the Senate to be shut down for it to be considered in recess based on past precedent. And this has continued all the way up to today. Now, by law, the Senate must adjourn between the end of 1 year's session and the start of the next year's session, which typically occurs this week. During that short period of time, during which the Senate may be in actual literal adjournment for approximately a few hours, Obama moved into that vacuum and announced he will recess appoint Mr. Cordray. This action is unparalleled in American history. Now, the reason for the recess appointment power granted by Article 2, Section 2, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution was because it may not always be practical to await for the Senate to reconvene to fill an important opening. If the president had to have an ambassador to France in the 1790s, or if President Jefferson had to appoint a Secretary of War, well, senators from Georgia and New Hampshire may need weeks, if not months, to travel by horse and wagon all the way back to the Capitol. So the recess appointment power was put in place to allow the president to fill critical openings because it was not practical to reconvene the Senate on short notice. Nowadays, it's very different. Any senator can be notified to return to Washington via text message, and every single one of them can be back in the Capitol in less than 12 hours when summoned. So the recess appointment, based on its original reason for being, is an historical anachronism. There's no reason for it anymore. However, since it remains in the Constitution, and no one has ever moved an amendment to eliminate the power, presidents have been using it with greater and greater frequency for political reason, with Obama now taking it to an even higher level. The sad part of all of this is that the Republicans have no problem with Mr. Cordray. They find him a highly qualified individual. The issue is, there are actually several with this, is the Consumer Board itself. Republicans have asked for 3 very simple changes. First, they want the single director replaced by a board of directors. One single director at the Consumer Protection Board has the power to wield unprecedented power for an unelected official over every single American. No 2 Americans can consummate any financial transaction in this country unless it meets with Mr. Cordray's approval. Judge Andrew Napolitano, for example, on Fox cited the example of a parent making a deal with a dentist to finance a set of braces for their child. Say you pay the dentist $250 a month for the next 3 years to pay for the braces. Richard Cordray has the power unilaterally to veto that. One man, unelected by the people, and in fact not even confirmed by the people's representatives, simply can't be allowed to wield that kind of power. Now, if the Republicans really wanted to drive him from office, you say, why don't they say zero out his salary? Well, they can't do that either, because the Consumer Protection Board is perhaps the only agency in the federal government, at least the only one I know of, that doesn't get its money from Congress. The authors of Dodd-Frank, Mr. Dodd and Mr. Frank, wrote the law in such a way so that the Consumer Protection Board gets its money from the Federal Reserve, not the Congress. So Congress is completely powerless to control the actions of the board or to deprive its members of their salaries. The Federal Reserve pays them. Republicans have asked for these 2 things to be changed. Senate Democrats have said no, the bill is passed, the bill is law, and it is done. And getting it undone will be very difficult. The only way you can get anything through the Senate with fewer than 60 votes is to show it will reduce the budget deficit to do so. Now, of course, Republicans in the House could find a way to do that simply by saying closing these offices and not paying these people will reduce expenditures and thus cause the deficit to fall by a relatively tiny amount. But that's not going to happen this year. Harry Reid would not even bring such a bill up for a vote in the United States Senate over the next year. This is one of the critical reasons Republicans have lobbied so hard, in addition to the repeal of health care reform, to also repeal Dodd-Frank and defang the so-called Consumer Protection Board. It stretches the Constitution itself into unrecognizable shapes. It confers power on unelected and unconfirmed government czars to levels never before seen. And it must be stopped. That's another reason why this upcoming election is among the most important in our history. Do you believe in the power of the government? Do you believe in the power of unelected czars? If you do, Barack Obama is your man. Do you believe in an all-powerful oligarchy that should hold a ruling class that should hold sway over the rest of us? Again, if you do, Barack Obama is your man. But if you believe in the principles upon which this country was founded, and which we were all brought up and taught to revere, we must make change. We must send a new president to Washington who will make the changes and back him up with a Congress that will undo the horrors of the last 3 years. The Iowa caucuses. We'll be back to talk about that in just a moment.
My uncle called, speech all slurred, complaining his arms numb. He called everyone. He even called my daughter Tiara because she's got a year of nursing. Everyone thinks he needs to go to the doctor, including me. So he said, well, will you take me? I'm like, I'm on the road. He goes, I'll wait. Stroke's no joke. If you or someone you love have symptoms of stroke, don't wait. It may be too late. Dial 911.
No. Pain. Oh, is that my heart? My heart. My heart? No, it'll pass. 911. Could call 911. No, ambulance. Couldn't do that. Sirens. Neighbors rushing over. Embarrassing. Too embarrassing. Maybe I'll feel better later. Oh.
Some people would rather die than call an ambulance. So that's exactly what they do.
The closest Iowa caucuses in history were conducted last night. Mitt Romney is the winner by 8 votes out of more than 122,000 cast over the late surging Rick Santorum. One would think that if maybe Santorum had one more day, maybe just a few more hours, he might have pulled this off. Now, I for one am greatly relieved that Mr. Romney won for one simple reason. I don't have a color on my Republican page map for Rick Santorum winning a state. I've got Romney in blue, I got Gingrich in green, we had brown for Mr. Kane, purple for Mr. Paul should he have won a state. That used to be Michelle Bachmann's color. What would I have done with Mr. Santorum if he had gotten 9 more votes? At least for now, I don't have to worry about it. The winners and losers? Mr. Romney, obviously, he won. How about Mr. Santorum, who won Iowa at the price of about 79 cents per vote? That's how little money he spent. I somehow suspect he'll have more money to spend on New Hampshire and South Carolina. Now, New Hampshire money won't be a big deal there. It's a small television market, and Santorum has the opportunity provided by not 1, but 2 live television debates between now and primary day. One on CBS on Face the Nation, and the other will be a live ABC debate. Then the candidates head for South Carolina, where a little more than a week from now, just 11 days, there will be another Fox News debate. Now, the New Hampshire campaign will come and go quickly. South Carolina, on the other hand, we have a little bit of a longer wait for that. There's 11 days between New Hampshire and South Carolina. Now, Iowans like their campaigns nice. New Hampshireites like their campaigns nice. South Carolinians love a good mud bath, and that's why primary elections in this state are so nasty. 4 years ago, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton had a knockdown, drag-out brawl here, as did McCain and Romney. And 4 years before that, John Kerry slogged through the mud here with the last of his Democratic opposition. And who would ever forget the 2000 cage match between George W. Bush and John McCain? South Carolina primary fights are never pretty, and this one will be no exception. In fact, this one may be the worst of all because of the rise of the super PAC. Romney's super PAC funneled millions of ads into Iowa. They're preparing to do the same in South Carolina as well. And none of those ads are going to have any nice things to say about anybody else in the field. While Romney goes about his business, taking on President Obama and seeking to create an air of inevitability about himself, his super PAC, which so effectively destroyed Newt Gingrich in Iowa, will now turn its fire on Mr. Santorum. Rick Santorum served a long time in Congress. And in Congress, you get to cast a lot of contradictory votes. Like, for example, say you voted different ways on 2 different versions of a balanced budget amendment. You voted no on a really bad one and yes on a really good one. Your opponent is going to run a commercial that's saying, that big bad Rick Santorum, he voted no on the balanced budget amendment. And he did, but he also voted yes. Thus is the problem of any candidate with a long legislative record seeking the presidency or other high office. There were losers last night. We all know by now the biggest loser was Michelle Bachmann, who finished dead last. Not counting John Huntsman, who didn't campaign there. Dead last. And it wasn't close. Single-digit support for Mrs. Bachmann, and seeing the tea leaves and realizing the consequences of going deeply into debt on a quixotic campaign for the presidency, Mrs. Bachmann today announced the suspension, quote-unquote, of her campaign. Now, a potential fight to win a 4th term in the House of Representatives could be ugly. Democrats who now may see her as wounded may field a top-flight opponent. At present, however, Mrs. Bachmann has no announced opponent on either side. So maybe now is exactly the right time to get out and get back in line for a fight for a House seat. As at present, there is no place for Mrs. Bachmann in the party leadership, so some are speculating she might not run again. But the more Tea Party representatives are elected to Congress, the more likely it is they will force a place for Mrs. Bachmann in the leadership. Rick Perry, big loser last night, coming in 5th. The fight within the fight last night was between Gingrich and Perry for 5th place. Perry spent millions of dollars in money that Gingrich didn't have to try and overtake the Speaker, who withered under relentless fire in the last 3 weeks. Perry couldn't make it. Last night he announced he was going back home to Texas to reassess. Today he twittered the results of his reassessment. It's on to South Carolina, which in turn means he's probably bypassing New Hampshire. There we believe Rick Perry will make his last stand. And of course, Ron Paul, who for a while last night it appeared he might win this thing. But with good weather across Iowa, maximizing turnout among other Republican candidates, Paul's vaunted Iowa Army wasn't quite enough to get the job done. He finished 3rd, well behind the 2 frontrunners. And so on we go. A week of New Hampshire nice, and then a brawl so big in South Carolina, you might want to get the UFC to promote it. You have been assimilated.